Okay, guys, welcome to episode 99 of Beyond MD. I'm really excited for this one. We're going to be talking about pension plans for incorporated physicians. We're going to be talking about the IPP, the individual pension plan, and importantly, we will be comparing and contrasting it to another excellent pension plan that's available to doctors in Ontario, which is through HOOPP. And with me today, I've got Sean Wilson, a certified financial planner out of Calgary, and I've also got Navaz Cassam, who is President and Chief Actuary at GBL. Hey guys, before we dive into the topic of the day, I'd love for you both to do some quick introductions on what you do. Sean, maybe we can start with you.
Sure, thanks. I'm a financial planner and the founder of my firm, Moraine Wealth Advisory. I work with business owners and incorporated professionals, typically with around $1 million to $10 million of investable assets. Now, our core focus is really on integrating corporate and personal planning. So for many physicians and entrepreneurs, the corporation is the main engine for wealth creation, and unless it's carefully coordinated with personal retirement goals, tax and risk, estate strategies, etc., there could be opportunities to get missed. So we just try to make sure we cover off the basis and allow people to make the most informed decisions possible.
Perfect. Navaz, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for having me on. So my name is Navaz Cassam. I'm a President and Chief Actuary, as you mentioned, of GBL, Gordon B. Lang & Associates. We've been around 30 years. I oversee all our products, our individual pension plans, retirement compensation arrangements, and we really focus on tax strategies for business owners and professional corporations. So that's kind of our bread and butter. I am an actuary. We're an actuarial firm, so we manage all the actuarial aspects of all our products and help our clients kind of achieve retirement stability and financial security without managing assets. That's Sean.
I love it. Okay, let's start off with maybe a bit of a review. I know this has been covered on the podcast before, but let's just start off with what is a defined benefit pension?
Sure, yeah. A defined benefit pension is a promise at retirement. So ultimately, you're funding something, and the benefit of retirement should ultimately be guaranteed. So usually it's based on service and earnings, a formula. So it could be a 2% of final average earnings or a set dollar amount per year of service. But ultimately what you're saying is at retirement, I will get this amount of benefit. As opposed to a defined contribution RSP, where you're actually defining how much you put in every year, but your benefit at retirement is not guaranteed.
Okay. Can you go over the defined benefit formula for an IPP? And then we can compare and contrast it to HOOPP as well.
Yeah, for sure. So for a defined benefit plan, for an IPP, there is flexibility, but typically our clients choose the best formula, which is a 2% earnings formula. So we take 2% of your earnings every year, and that calculates your benefit. At retirement, if you have 30 years of service, we add that in. So for every year for 30 years, and you get a benefit amount of, whatever the retirement benefit is based on your earnings. So, at $100,000 earnings, based on a 2% for 30 years, you're looking at about $60,000. And I know my numbers are low, but just to kind of outline what the benefit would be at retirement.
Okay, perfect. We can touch on the formula for HOOPP as well. Sean, is this something that you want to take? I can throw it out there and then
Sure.
We can kind of dissect it. I'll let you go with it, and then we can tackle it together.
Yeah, so I think when you look at the funding formula for HOOPP in terms of how we're contributing to the plan from an investment standpoint, the employee is putting 6.9% up to YMPE and 9.2% beyond, and the employee in this case is accruing a benefit at 1.5% up to YMPE and 2% above. Now, where it gets interesting though is in the case for incorporated physicians, you are actually going to be covering up both the employee and the employer portion. So the amount that you would actually have to fund from an employee standpoint, we'd have to take a 1.26 factor, multiply what the employee contribution was, and that'll get you your total contribution for a given year.
Okay, and just that defined benefit formula, just so people can really piece it together. So you would basically take 1.5% of your earnings up to the YMPE. You would add 2% of earnings beyond the YMPE, and I believe you multiply that by your years of service. And now, in fact, when I had talked to HOOPP, I think that 1.5% up to the YMPE, I think that had in fact been a little bit higher in past years for a lot of their members. But anyways, there you go. We have up to 2% of earnings, multiplying that by your years of service, and that gives you the defined benefit. Navaz, anything to add there at all?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So where the IPP formula is a flat 2% for every year of service,
Yeah.
The HOOPP plan has that YMPE at 1.5%. But you're right, they have retroactively increased their earnings, their percentage from 1.5 to 1.9 or 2 based on surplus in the plan and the health of the plan. It is not guaranteed, but they have done it in the past.
I do want to touch on earnings for a second because I think this is really important. So with HOOPP, when I had done a dive into that plan, basically you'd go back in time, look at your 5 highest years of consecutive earnings, make that your baseline earnings, and then we have a bit of a sliding scale where we adjust up or down based on CPI plus 1% or down by the same amount, and that would kind of dictate your baseline earnings, and then you could contribute to that upper level each year going forward. With an IPP, Navaz, can you shed some light on how do we determine what our earnings are going to be? Is it something similar, or does it kind of fluctuate on a year-to-year basis?
Yeah, so no, in an IPP, we use your actual earnings
Yeah.
for your service. So there's no baseline earnings set or anything like that. So
Okay.
if you made $200,000 that year, we'd utilize that. If it was $75,000, we utilize that. So there's a lot of flexibility. In the IPP, we're not reducing service or doing anything like that. We're actually counting the full earnings that you use in that year.
Okay.
So
Beautiful.
there's no baseline earnings set or any aspect like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the IPP, you're increasing your flexibility around other planning areas. So, if you want to take more dividends out because you want to clear some notional accounts, you can do that. Your household cash flow remains the same, but you might have a smaller T4 income for one given year, which means you have a reduced, call it a full year pension equivalent with an IPP versus when you look at the HOOPP plan, the baseline earnings decision is a really important decision, both when you're looking at what you want to do and how you can commit to it going forward. It's a big decision.
Okay, I'm going to touch a bit on eligibility, and I can take this one and feel free to fill in any gaps. But to be eligible for a pension, a physician needs to be incorporated, and there should be salary being paid, so T4 income. To be eligible for HOOPP, you have to be an incorporated doctor within Ontario, and then a member as well of the Ontario Hospital Association, the OHA. An IPP is available to anybody in Canada who is incorporated and paying T4 salary. A few other interesting situations just to outline with HOOPP. So if you're an incorporated doctor and you take part in HOOPP, any new employees within your corporation will then also be taking part in HOOPP. And then if you are an incorporated doctor in Ontario taking part in HOOPP, and if you are more than 50% owner of, let's say, another medical clinic, then downstream effect, then that medical clinic would also be taking part in HOOPP. That is a summary of eligibility. Anything to add there before we move on?
I think that is probably, it's a great win for employees, but it's also a risk that I think the doctors need to go into with their eyes wide open, in the sense that, defined benefit pension plans in this country have generally more or less become something known with government. So you have high participation rate in defined benefit pension plans. In the private sector, it's really decreased over a number of years, and now we're seeing, I think it's like somewhere around the roughly 20-25% might actually have these type of pensions. So I think when you're thinking about the risk that you're taking on as an employee if you join HOOPP, or as a doctor if you join HOOPP, and then if you're going to have staff, there is this ongoing requirement. So you're not just funding your pension, you're funding your staff's pension. So I think that's something that when you go into it, this would be something where you want to sit down with probably your accountant, you want to sit down with your financial planner, probably want to build a business plan around what that's going to look like and how it might impact the other areas of your financial life.
Let's move on to contributions. Sean, you had already touched on this a little bit. So the amount that one would be contributing into the pension under HOOPP, I'll just reiterate some numbers here. So for HOOPP, every year you would be contributing 6.9% up to the YMP, 9.2% beyond the YMP, which is around $70,000, give or take, right? Rough numbers, guys? Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
71,300, yep.
Yeah, perfect. And then the corporation would be contributing 1.26 times that. So you have the employee contribution, the employer, the MPC contribution through HOOPP based on those numbers. And then Why don't we just compare and contrast that to an IPP? How much are we going to be contributing into an IPE? And also, one key question is, how does this vary with age? Let's start with that, Navaz, or Sean. Anyone who wants to take it. Yeah.
I can take the example just for the hoop side. So I ran a scenario here. Just $200,000. You have roughly up to 6.9% of 71,300, which is $4,919 and change, and then above that would be 128,700 at 9.2%. So that's 11,840 for the 2% portion above YMPE, which is the employee contribution being 16,760. Now your employer contribution being a 1.26 factor works out to 21,000, bringing the total funding in this particular scenario to $37,877.
Yeah, and that's bang on. So, for example, with Hoop, it's defined, as we know, based on earnings alone. There's no age criteria. With the IPP, it allows you to fund a lot more into this asset account because age is a big factor. You're not grouping, you're not putting it together with, thousands of other members and kind of creating that hybrid. What's the right percentage amount for the whole group? So in the IPP, you can actually fund a lot more, tax deferred and tax deductible. At age 45, you can put in close to 40,000. At age 65, you can put in, based on 2025 numbers, you can put in close to 55,000. So that's a nice bump of, almost $20,000 or around $18,000 more that you can fund pre-tax and tax deferred till retirement. So there is an upside. In terms of if you want to extract more money out of your corp and have more tax deferred, tax deductible assets, the IPP gives you that flexibility. Again, one thing I will note is that the IPPs, and we'll touch on this later, I think, is that they are flexible. So, unlike a hoop plan, the contributions are not mandatory. It is really up to the employer. So if they have different things they want to partake in that year or grow the business or buy a building, they have that flexibility as physicians. Where in the hoop plan, the contributions are the contributions and you make them based on your earnings.
This brings me to one really important question, Navaz, probably more for you here, but Sean, feel free to pitch in wherever you can. Contributing more with age into an IPP, I just really want to wrap my head around why is that important? Is that more important from the perspective of, okay, I'm putting more in and generating a more sizable tax deduction for my corporation? Or is it more important because Is it going to give me a bigger payout later on? Because I thought the benefit or the payout was dictated by that formula. I'd love some clarification on this.
Yes, for sure. So the HOOP plan is your traditional defined benefit pension plan where it has a benefit at retirement. So you get the benefit at retirement until you die. So longevity is a big player there. So if you do live to 100, the assets are there. They're going to pay out as long as the plan has the financial wherewithal to pay it out. But let's assume it does. It's all good. It has been for a number of years. So that pays out your benefit, which is your formula 1.5 and 2% after the YMPE for life. With the IPP, what you're doing is you're accumulating a balance. So you're accumulating this asset balance at retirement. You do start drawing down on this asset balance based on a formula, which is your 2% formula that we talked about. But the nice thing about the IPP is you've accumulated additional assets. If you were to die sooner than anticipated or something was to happen, you have access to those funds. Or those funds will go to your beneficiary or your state on death. So you've created a larger asset balance and you've created something to kind of pass on to the next generation. And or your spouse, so the same rules apply where if you have a spouse, you can elect to join a survivor pension. He or she can receive that benefit from the plan, but when they die, then there's still, a likelihood there's an asset balance paid out. So you've accumulated more assets, but you do have something kind of left over. And then if you were to die early, then that benefit stays with you and not necessarily the plan because it's your own plan in the IPP. Where in the HOOP plan, it kind of stays in the plan and gets distributed to other members.
Okay. I want to go to a situation where, let's say, maybe I wasn't working one year. I go on sabbatical and I'm maybe putting in a lot less into the plan. So I understand if I put in, let's say, half of what I usually would, then under HOOP I would get a partial year of service. Does the same apply to an IPP?
So an IPP, you'd get if that's what you earned, if you only earned $100,000 that year, or $50,000, or whatever that number is, you'd get full year of service based on that earnings amount. And that earnings amount is indexed from the time you earn it to retirement. So that 50,000 we said would be indexed every year to retirement. So it would actually grow. If we had 20, 25 years, it would grow to north of 100,000, no problem. So you do accrue the full year of service. We don't cut it off based on because you only earn 50,000. We're only going to give you half a year of earnings because your baseline earnings was 100,000, for example. If that makes sense.
Okay.
I don't know if Sean, you want to
sense.
touch on that. Okay.
Yeah. I do just want to clarify though. So you said even though I put in half of what I usually would, I would not be knocked down to a half year of service. Therefore, that pension formula at the end dictating that promise wouldn't really change that much. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, it would change a little bit because we do use actual earnings every year in the IPP versus the HOOPP uses your final average. But you'd get that indexing of the earnings from the time you took them till retirement. So that kind of bumps up that average to give you an increased benefit.
And I think that's where there's a pretty big difference then between when you look at the HOOPP plan, if you were to take say 50%, like let's say you set your baseline earnings at $200,000 and you for whatever reason only paid yourself a salary of $100,000 in any given year. Let's say the year that your baseline earnings is $200,000, you paid yourself a $100,000 salary, and the rest is dividends for other planning reasons. So there's two things that are going to happen. First off, you're only going to get half a year of service in that situation, but now your baseline earnings is going to go from $200,000 down to $194. So then this ongoing compounding of CPI plus 1 for future years will be less as you progress through your career.
That's a very fair point. Now, let's talk about special contributions. So one thing I will point out, HOOPP is a multi-employer plan, and their investment performance has been very strong over the years. So 2024 returning 9.7%, and then 10-year annualized 7.5% each year. It's also more than fully funded. So there's not the opportunity for special contributions, whereas with an IPP, let's say the investment portfolio is less than the 7.5% target. My understanding is that brings up the possibility of special contributions. Can we add some color to this and maybe just answer the question, why can special contributions be important?
Sure, Sean, do you want to take this or do you want me to?
Well, sure, and then I'll take it, and if you want to add any color, I guess. But so when you're looking at, if your return expectations coming at 5, the amount of money you're going to have at the end of the day 20 years out is going to be a lot less. And then if you're able to, when you start looking at the way the math rolls over many years, that 7.5% is sort of the sweet spot where the pension kind of can be funded. So when we don't have those higher return years, we can top up. Now, on the flip side, though, you can also have years where you might have better returns. So then you could create a surplus situation in an IPP where you don't have to fund as much. And that'll be something that'll be really driven by, I think, the individual's risk tolerance and capacity. You could have someone who would be very aggressive in an all equity portfolio, and if they do exceptionally well, they may not have to fund much.
Yeah, and to Sean's point, right, it comes down to the individual preference of the member, right? If they want to be a bit riskier and take those gambles, investing in, different asset classes, or if we see the market drop, they have that ability to fund it within their own risk profile. Where when the HOOPP plan, it is great because they don't have that issue in terms of having to make funding. But if the HOOPP plan does have, subsequent years of poor performance, there's really no ability to top up because they don't go to employers. So it might be an increase of contributions or reduced benefits. Now, they haven't had that, don't get me wrong. But we know other multi-employer plans have had issues like that in the past. So there's always a risk there. Where in the IPP, you can at least use pre-tax dollars to help get you back to where you want to be.
Now, my understanding is if there is a documented and proven disability, HOOPP has something called free accrual, which can benefit the member. Does the IPP offer anything like that too? Just for thoroughness here.
No.
Yeah, no. That is a nice added benefit of the HOOPP plan. The IPP does not have a disability waiver or anything. It's ultimately the member's money, so there's no there's no ability for that.
Okay, let's move on to the pension itself and what's happening within it from an investment perspective and also control and flexibility. Let's start off with investments. So we've talked about HOOPP. The investment performance has been strong. And one of the questions that I get from my listeners is, well, with an IPP, how much say can I have with my investments? That's question one. And then question two is, can I even DIY the investments inside an IPP? I'd love some color on this.
Sure. I mean, I think when you start looking at the IPP, certainly you can invest the pension assets. You're going to have that from a do-it-yourself perspective. You might find a little less flexibility, or you might find it a little bit challenging with some custodians in terms of just wanting to work with someone on a DIY basis when it comes to doing an IPP. And maybe Navaz can maybe provide some color as to maybe how many people that they have in the IPP universe who are actually doing self-directed. And then if you're hiring somebody to work with you and help manage your IPP assets, I think the one thing you need to keep in mind is that no single investment can make up 10% of your total funds, and you can't invest in your own company. I think broad-based mutual funds, ETFs should be fine. Not allowed. And then depending on how the individual goes about investing their IPP funds, you could take on additional risks. So maybe younger career, maybe a bit more aggressive, feeling like you got lots of earning time, you might be a bit more aggressive, similar to how maybe a younger individual saving on RSP, they might be more growth oriented and then move towards more of a balanced portfolio as they get closer to retirement to reduce risk. But the one thing that you get with the IPP too is you are paying for this, but if you're let's say you're paying someone 1% to manage your assets, that's a deduction that your corporation can get, but you're paying for it. Under HOOPP, that investment management is covered, I believe. So.
Yeah, it's inherently covered in the returns, right? So to Sean's point, for the DIY, we do have a small subset of clients that do it. So we have thousands of IPPs under administration, and let's say 20 or less kind of are self-directed, or maybe around 30. So it's not as common, but there is that ability there. It's matching up with the right custodian to allow them to do it on that side. And then as Sean mentioned, the other two rules are general pension rules. There was a big pension plan that had a lot of its assets in its own company. The company's share price went down. The assets got hammered. So, and we find with our client base, we've never really had an issue because they don't really have an opportunity to invest in their corp. Right, this is not an investable corp. They prefer the diversity. So, with an IPP, I would say the member has full flexibility. Right, it's between them and their advisor to decide on what they want to do. There's no one else calling the shots.
Go ahead, Sean. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think the other thing when you're looking at this, when you start looking at the IPP and how you can be investing it, I think you got to look at things in the context of, a physician is going to likely have a large TFSA, decent sized non-registered account personally, plus some retained earnings in their corporate that are investing. So you have multiple places that you're going to be drawing income from in retirement. So in terms of, there's longevity risk, which HOOPP is going to take care of hands down, no problem. But when you start looking in the context of, do I want to do an IPP, I think you just got to look at what are my different buckets projected to be and how much do I have so that I can, if I want control and be able to make this decision and have flexibility, then understand those different buckets, what that's going to look like throughout time, and you have a sense of how big that risk is for your particular situation.
I appreciate that. Now, a few months ago, a listener messaged me, and their question was, I'm opening up an IPP. Can I, as things stand today in Canada, is there a way for me to DIY my own investments? So, Navaz, from your answer, it sounds like for a very small minority of people, the answer is yes to that?
It is yes. It's mainly finding a provider that'll set it up for them. So there are some of our clients that have it, and we can try to help potential clients get on that aspect. But we know some have kind of gotten out of it, but there are still some providers. So it doesn't come up a lot in our block of business, to be honest. Which surprisingly, I thought it would be a lot more popular.
So, but then the investment management fees, those are going to be discussed between the IPP holder and their advisor, and then those fees are going to be a tax deduction as well.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah. Can I get a sense of the ongoing costs? Like, let's talk about setup costs, admin costs, and actuarial costs that one can expect should they enroll in an IPP?
Yeah, for sure. So for our, and every firm is a bit different, but we charge for a single member IPP, we charge $1,700 per year as a flat rate. That includes your setup, that includes your annual triannual valuations, all your filings every year, kind of the whole 9 yards. It also includes retirement and termination estimates as you get closer to retirement. So we kind of take care of everything on that side of it. So there's no bump every third year for evaluation, or if you have a plan change or amendment, there's no additional charge for that. So we try to keep it very simple and succinct, and then our office handles everything on the back end. So a lot of times, I'll be honest, the physicians we work with are like, what's GBL? What's an actuary? Because they have their account, they have their advisor, and we're not offended by that, right? So we're really flexible. We'll work directly with the physician or the advisor or the accountant or all three. We kind of leave it up to them, but that's what we charge. So there's no additional fees for OHA or anything like that involved, but there is a fee to maintain the IPP every year.
Okay, so you're saying not many people in my space may know what an actuary is, so I'm guessing that you guys aren't the most popular at the cocktail party. That's what I'm getting, right?
We think we are, but we're not really.
Okay, that is helpful. I want to move on to just control and flexibility of a pension. Let's maybe just compare and contrast the plans in terms of, let's say something happens. Let's say there's a big emergency, I can't work, or I say, you know what, I want to go travel the world. What happens to my funds in an IPP? We can contrast that with HOOPP. If I want to pull them or access them much earlier than expected, what am I looking at here?
So the IPP is super flexible in that regard, right? So Ontario changed the legislation a few years ago. They're pretty much out of it. So the Ontario pension regulator, you're the owner of the company and it's your pension plan. We don't care. Mm-hmm. So it's nice in terms of flexibility just on funding and contributions, and gives that we obviously ask our clients to fund it and get that benefit, but we know stuff comes up, right? So if they really needed access to the funds immediately, they could terminate the pension plan. It moves into an RSP and they can access the funds right away. So they have that ability for hardships or anything like that. If it's minor and they just can't fund it for the year because there's not enough assets, and they are, in their company or they're doing other stuff, they have that flexibility as well. They're like, we're not going to make our contributions this year, or if there's special contributions, we're not going to make those. It's not like they lose the room, it just carries over to future years. So we've seen clients take advantage of that, a few years of contribution holidays, and then bam, the business is flying. We're going to make up the past service contributions and kind of fund that fully. So they do have that flexibility in the IPP. Which, necessarily in the HOOPP plan, the money's there. So yeah, they could, they'd probably have to terminate as a participating employer in HOOPP, get that money out, depending on their age. Now, we don't have all the details on what happens pre-age 55 and post-age 55, because typically if you're a participating employer and you're part of the plan, after age 55, you don't really have access to the funds. You pick a pension where prior to age 55, you can take a commuted value. So if you can terminate prior to age 55, you take a commuted value. Some of it moves non-locked in, some of it's locked in. You have some access to the funds. So there's a bit more, work involved, and not guarantee that you get all the funds. There are hardship provisions and other stuff that apply with the regulator, but that would kind of be on a case-by-case basis. So, the IPP is a lot more flexible in that regard.
Okay, not that I would do this, but let's say I dramatically change my investment strategy and I think that Amazon, Tesla are going to the moon and I want to become much more concentrated, and I say, guys, I want to cancel the IPP, I want to pull out. What does that process look like?
So we just terminate the pension plan, really, is what we do, right? Yeah. So what's the termination date? Is it, today's date? Sure, no problem. Oh, sorry. I have sensor lights in my office. We pick a termination date. It could be today's date. We terminate the pension plan. We calculate the amount transfers to an RSP. There's a maximum transfer value calculation. Some of it might go taxable. HOOPP would have the same criteria, right? It's from the CRA, part of the Income Tax Act. And we move that money to an RSP, and then you can do what you want with it, right? As long as you're prior to age 71, similar to the HOOPP plan, at age 71, you got to make a decision in terms of taking the money out. But prior to age 71, it's your choice on what you want to do.
And
Okay.
and I think the other thing on the flexibility in a situation where maybe you have a shortened life expectancy, you can also just take the commuted value of an IPP, spend more in the early years. Like if your life expectancy, if you were thinking like 85 or 90, and now you're saying like, I at best might make it 80 to 80, then you can spend more. You can either choose to draw money more out of the funds you have in the IPP by collapsing it and, use that for flexibility and maybe living more of life while you're alive, like accelerating how you might go about living life in
Yep.
those final years.
Yep. No, that's a very fair point. Anything else on flexibility control that we should cover before moving on?
So really, when you terminate the IPP, you still have some of the options that exist with the HOOPP plan. So you have the option to take a deferred pension. You can buy an annuity if you want that for sake of just, if your spouse or someone you're worried about. So you do have some of those options too. It's not that you have to take the cash out. I will say majority of our clients do just terminate and move it into an RSP. And move that way in Ontario, but there are other options there too. It's not pick one. We give you the options, and then you kind of make that decision.
Okay, let's talk about the retirement phase now, or withdrawing from the pension. I know that a lot of doctors tend to work into their later years, but one change that I'm noticing, at least in my generation, is that people seem to be going to part-time earlier, just taking their foot off the gas a little bit. And I think that's just a shift in mentality, a bit more work-life balance. I know that with HOOPP, you can start to get access to a bridge benefit starting as early as 55. And I wanted to understand an IPP. How early could one start to withdraw from the pension there?
Yeah. So, you can start taking your IPP as early as 50 on a reduced basis.
Okay.
So, and you can still get a bridge
Yep.
benefit. All those ancillary benefits do apply in the IPP. We give the member the option. Do they want it? Do they not want it? It's really up to them, right? If they do choose to retire early, and I laugh because, in our block of business, I'd say physicians never retire early.
I'm noticing a change though, but maybe
Okay.
it hasn't come
Yeah.
through yet. It hasn't come through yet. Yeah. Now, this is a bit on the fly, and we can edit this out. But Navaz, I just thought of one thing. Let's just say somebody decides they want to retire early, but they haven't really built up the pension funds yet. I know there is this one concept of terminal funding, like we talked about some special
Yep.
contributions. But perhaps this is something we can touch on. Terminal funding, is this something that is valuable to somebody who has an IPP? Is it important? Do you see it commonly in your space?
We do, yes. So if you do retire earlier, even if you retire at a normal retirement age, terminal funding consists of multiple aspects. So one is that bridge benefit. The other one is full indexing. So you have these options at retirement that you can elect that cost money, for example. So that's where the terminal funding comes in. So if you decide that, hey, I want to increase my retirement benefit, I have the ability to fund extra at retirement. So we do the calculations on our end. We provide it to the member, and we say you can fund up to, let's say, $500,000. And the client can come to us and say, okay, we want to fund $300,000. So we kind of work backwards to see what that would entail. Right? Some clients are like, no, we have a lot of money in there. We're good. We don't want to add any additional funds. Some, well, how much can we write a check for? What's the maximum amount? So there is that nice ancillary benefit that's part of a defined benefit that you do have to supplement your retirement income. That if you weren't there long enough.
Okay, so let's just say, I want to make sure I understand this. So let's say I'm wanting to access the pension earlier than expected. Let's say there's not as much built inside that pension as one would have expected. This opens up the door to terminal funding, which means a lump sum funding event, which is calculated by actuaries, and it could be in the ballpark of hundreds of thousands of dollars, which would mean tax deduction to the corporation.
Correct.
Am I
correct?
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be funded all right away. The nice thing is you could fund it over a few years. We would give you that option. You can elect it and then fund it over a few years. So it's not like you're on the hook on day one to write a check for $300,000. You can kind of mitigate that over a number of years, depending on everyone's financial situation.
I think this might be a good way to maybe also introduce the concept of like, if you wanted to do an RCA closer to retirement, this is where you would maybe introduce something like that. If you had, the ability to make some additional funding, you could do it later on, closer to when you're wanting to retire, to help bridge that early retirement, or defer drawing on the IPP and using, say, an RCA to kind of fund those first few years.
We can touch on that now. I did have one topic way back in the day on RCA, so retirement compensation arrangements. But what are the main factors here that you would talk to people about in terms of answering the question, hey, is an RCA relevant for me? We can touch on this, and I'll open the floor to you guys.
Yeah, for sure. So the RCA is really it's income driven, right? So for high income earners over that Income Tax Act max, there's no real benefit in there. So the RCA comes into play, the retirement compensation arrangement. So what you can do is you can utilize your full earnings. So if you're making, $500,000 a year, $750,000 a year, we can design a defined benefit plan that utilizes the full earnings level. So at retirement, you actually have a nice bump, and your earnings are a lot higher to reflect maybe your lifestyle and what you expect to spend at retirement. So that gives the member the ability to fund more while they're active or close to retirement, either a lump sum or monthly payments, to get this increased benefit of retirement. And we keep it really flexible, where it's not, I'd say we could define it to be a percentage of earnings times salary and all that, or they can use it as kind of a top up or a balancing item, right? My investments is really well, I'm going to draw on some of this. I have some, real estate assets and portfolios, and then I have a shortfall, I'm going to take it out of the RCA. So I kind of get to the number I want. It creates a lot of flexibility, but it does give you a tax deferred and tax efficient way to save for retirement using an RCA. And Sean, I don't know if you want to add anything to that in terms of.
No, I think that I think when you're, HOOPP obviously has an RCA component for the higher income earners. I think if you're going down the IPP route, I think you carry that decision down the road until closer to retirement, see how much money you've accumulated, how is your IPP doing, and then do you want to, use, say, an RCA to supplement some of your other retirement savings.
So, yeah, it is a nice way, again, for flexibility. Mm-hmm. You're not setting a high baseline earnings off the bat. And
let's just talk about the defined benefit payouts in retirement. Are those going to be indexed to inflation through an IPP? And then we can also compare that to HOOPP, because my understanding for HOOPP is that indexing to inflation is at the discretion of the board of directors, but going back historically, they seem to have indexed it to inflation and done a good job there. But I wanted to know with an IPP, what can we expect there?
Correct, yeah. So for an IPP, it's up to the member if they want indexing or not. Okay. So we give the members flexibility, right? We say, yeah, get indexing, it's great. You have real dollars every year to keep up with spending and inflation. But some clients elect not to, because they're like, you know what, we don't need the income. We have other avenues of income, as Sean mentioned. And some take the full indexing. So we kind of let them pick where they want to go. Do they want the full CPI indexing? Do they want to go somewhere in between? Do they want none of it? So the ability to index is there. We can make it mandatory, but we can find our clients really prefer the option, right? They're like, well, we don't want that much. We want to, utilize that and have it last longer, or whatever the case is. With HOOPP, you're right. So they kind of decide annually. It's more ad hoc if indexing is going to be applied or not. They do have a track record of providing it. And as long as the assets are doing really well, I can't imagine them not offering it. But the IPP also offers it as well. So it is. It just comes down to flexibility. But the indexing is nice, right? Because we know. $100 yesterday is not the same as $100 today.
Maybe we can run some numbers now. I know we were talking about, let's say, somebody starting a pension at age 40, looking at T4 income of $200,000 a year, retiring at 65. I'm curious what the numbers look like when we look at HOOPP, when we look at an IPP. I'll let you guys take it from here.
Yeah. No, for sure. So we ran a few scenarios. Interest rate is a big driver, right? How much do you earn on your assets really dictate how it goes. So we ran a few scenarios ranging from 5% to 7%, so nothing really out of line. We didn't pick a 10% rate of return. We kind of picked somewhere in the norm. of what we anticipate our client base or clients in general that they'd want to return. So we use the same earnings level. We calculated what the HOOPP benefit would be out of the plan. We applied indexing, and then we just kind of outlined it based on amounts left over at age 90 or to what level the benefits would pay. So for example, at a 5% rate of return, again, at 200,000, your earnings go up every year. You have a benefit starting at age 65. At a 5% rate of return, you'd probably have similar amount of funding in an IPP as you would surviving to age 83, right? So there's a bit of longevity risk there depending on the average age and when you're going to live. For example, at a 5.5% rate of return, you'd have an amount available funding to age 87. So at age 87, roughly a little bit over, is when those account balances kind of equal. So if you're living a lot longer, then the HOOPP benefit is better because you're still going to get paid. At a 6% rate of return, again, I don't think we're out of line in terms of what investment rate should be. At age 90, so if you were to die at age 90, you would have, you and your spouse or whatever benefit you had in play, you would have $460,000 left over in the IPP. So we've just looked at an account balance. You're drawing down the same annual pension every year. And then if we jump to 6.5%, you're left with $2.3 million left over at age 90. And at 7%, you're left with $4.6 million left over at age 90. So interest rate does come into play and what the member wants to do, right? So, if you're very risk adverse and you're on the lower end of the scale and longevity is a big risk, HOOPP might be a better option for you. If, hey, you're investing and you're doing really well as it is, and you can attain this 6.5%, you might have, a couple $1 million left over at age 90, assuming you live to age 90. Now, if you die earlier, you have more assets in the IPP than you would in the HOOPP plan, because once your guarantees are finished in the HOOPP plan and you pass away and your spouse passes away, if it's a joint survivor pension, and the guarantees are expired, there's no more amounts payable. Where the IPP, it's your assets.
And just to clarify, just because I don't know if that was maybe picked up by everybody, but the funding of this IPP model was using the HOOPP funding? Correct? Yes.
Correct, yes. So we've assumed the same contributions coming in between what you put into HOOPP and what you put into the IPP. So we didn't take into account the benefit you get by contributing more into the IPP, because as you get older you can. We just wanted to compare kind of an apples to apples comparison, showing, when would you be worse off and kind of better off between the two plans. And I
really appreciate that. That's a very balanced approach. Now, if we just talk about this from a conceptual level, if we were separating the two plans and saying, okay, we're going to contribute to an IPP based on age, because we know that's going to change, then those numbers that you gave in that last scenario, let's say somebody was returning, I'll go to the 6% scenario, and I think you said there was a certain chunk left over at age 90. It was either $460,000 or $1 million plus. Then we're looking at a higher number than that, right?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. At 6%, it was a $460,000 kind of leftover balance. That balance would be higher, mainly because you're contributing more, and our amounts we're taking out every year were based on the HOOPP formula. So you're taking out less, so you'd have a much higher asset balance at that. And I will just, we ran one because we know the HOOPP plan provides longevity, right? That's what it is. So you don't, if you live to 100 or 110, great for you. HOOPP is fantastic because those benefits are guaranteed till you die. But what if you were to pass away early? You retire at 65, and you pass away at age 73. You have a joint and survivor pension, 2/3, the normal form, with a 5-year guarantee under HOOPP. At a 5.5% return, you'd have $2 million left over in the IPP. Right? Where in the HOOPP plan, that money would stay with HOOPP. So it's just one of the things to consider in terms of, when we come down to risk preference, right? Every client has a different risk preference and what they want.
Okay. Maybe we can just take this as a segue to the final item, which is really like what happens for the next generation. So we talked about, let's say, plan member and spouse pass away after retirement. What can we expect for the assets in an IPP? They just directly go to the beneficiaries, I understand?
Yeah, if there's named beneficiaries, they go to the beneficiaries. If there's no beneficiary or the beneficiaries of the estate, they get paid to the estate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a very, very simple.
Okay. I do want to ask you guys a couple quick questions on who maybe should not consider a pension plan? In my mind, I think it's a valuable bucket. I'm in my early 40s. I'm 41, and I'm starting to think about these things more, some strategies. But, for example, some people have told me, if you like to invest by yourself in your corporation, you can enjoy that flexibility. You can have the flexibility of your registered accounts along the side there, and you may be well set up for life, just enjoying that kind of flexibility. But is there anyone who should not consider a pension?
I think it comes down to cash flow. I'm biased as an actuary. I think pensions for all. And really, it's retirement stability, right? So we know there's a baseline benefit you're going to get at retirement to have that quality of life. Again, it comes down to cash flow. I think we've seen high income earners who spend more than they make or at that level. So if there's no ability to save, then maybe an IPP or the HOOPP plan aren't for you, because you don't have that excess cash to fund. With your other comment about saving the corp, when you save in the corp, you get hit with the small business deduction clawback. So, if you're in too much in passive income, it draws down your small business deduction. There's also a high tax rate on passive income investments in the corp, depending on how you're investing. So the IPP gives you that flexibility of investing your own money for yourself, but removing those loopholes out of it. So it's a more tax efficient manner. So that's where I think the difference is, that you can still do what you want to do. Moving that money from your corp to your IPP takes away some of that clawback. Your small business deduction goes up to 27% all of a sudden, because you lose it all if you're earning over $150,000 of passive income. The high passive income rates that you're taxed at annually, you kind of avoid those and defer that to retirement. So there's a lot of benefits there. That you don't necessarily get if you don't have an IPP or another strategy in place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any closing thoughts as we wrap this up? I think we covered everything, but in case I didn't, I want to open it up to you guys.
Yeah, I think just a few things. I think flexibility and portability, are very important, right? It depends on what you want. So if you want the flexibility, to kind of choose what you want to do, how you want to fund, then, the IPP is better. If you want that longevity risk and not have to worry about anything, HOOPP is a good plan for that. There is cross subsidies, which we didn't really touch on a lot, right? And I mentioned this because what we see, and I think, Yathin, you're saying that there's a change in dynamic between retiring early, but we always find doctors never want to retire. And we don't blame them. You spend so long, you work so hard, such a knowledge set. It's kind of hard to give that up. So we say, if you're going to defer retirement to age 71, then all those early retirement benefits that you might be paying for indirectly through HOOPP, you may not benefit from, right? And there are cross subsidies between young to old, between single and married, some of the subsidies. So those are things to consider when you're deciding which option is best for you. Because it might be great to have, a disability benefit, but, I know physicians that became partially disabled and went back to work because they wanted to work. So then you're working, we're not exactly sure how that applies for the contribution holiday in HOOPP. So it's a different mindset versus maybe an employer group working somewhere else. The mindset of physicians and how they work and their work ethic is different, and they do tend to work longer and to work later. So are they going to get these benefits they're paying for? Maybe, maybe not, right? We don't have a crystal ball to know when someone's going to die. And it really comes down to flexibility. Sean, do you have anything kind of...
Well, I think the one last thing I'll touch on, I already touched on it a little bit, but I just think when you're in this situation, you're evaluating these things, I really think there's a ton of opportunity that gets unlocked with planning, and I think I would incorporate financial planning, reaching out to a financial planner if you don't have one, getting that work done to help make the most informed decisions moving forward and how it's going to impact your big picture. Yes, their assumptions are projecting out over the long term. We got to start somewhere, but I think this is just going to allow those who are contemplating an IPP or HOOPP or any other kind of maybe option they might want to look at and just not doing either. They can look at what that looks like and have a way better understanding of how it impacts both, wealth accumulation and drawdown over your life.
Okay. Very well said, both of you. And I just want to take a moment right now to thank both of you for making the time, coming on here and educating myself and my audience on a very important topic, and one that in the last 12 months has become very popular, but also quite confusing for us, right? Because there's a lot of options out there. So I think to talk about this today was really valuable. Thank you.
One thing I'd add to, actually, we're going to try to put together a PDF document. So when people are listening, we'll have a link to it in the podcast for those who want to dive in a little bit deeper with maybe some examples, etc.
Yeah, and we'll have that in the show notes. Sean, thanks for the reminder there. All right, guys, I had a lot of fun today.
Thank you.
And,
thank you so much.
Learned a lot picking your brains, and have a great one, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.